Hello, and welcome back to the Can Diversity Collective's Inkwell Beach virtual session for 2021. This is day one, and it's so great to end the day with this group of people who last year our Brazil connection gave us the highest rated number of folks attending. So I'm expecting that you phoned a friend and invited everybody in to join this session again for us this year. So I just want to say thank you guys for joining us. This is our 3 o'clock session. It is what does it really take for diversity efforts not to fail on the creative side? So I'm assuming all of you guys are magical creatives and you're going to give us some insight into what it means to make diversity successful as it relates to creative. So I'm going to let you take it away. Thank you, Chelsea, Oriel, Felipe, Joana, and our Lani is who's coming. Lani, who's going to come in when I step out. I hope you guys have a great session. We'll be watching in the background, and I will come back and say goodbye.
Hey guys, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Woo. Welcome everyone. I'm Lani Dourado. I run a global collective of creatives and strategists in the US, along with our founder, Andres Chavez, who will be texting me throughout this, I'm sure. Our collective works with strategists and their causes to get some traction in the media. It's a labor of love. I'm a first-gen Filipino Jewish strategist, and I've worked in a lot of different agencies, client side. I've gotten involved in a lot of C&I conversations and agencies between Brazil, New York, and Los Angeles, where I'm currently based. The inspiration for this panel is, the reality is Brazil's a really big country, the US is a really big country, and we are some of the 2 most awarded ad markets in the world. But there is a lot to be done in regards to the question of inclusion. And while a lot of agencies have pledged to do better and are making some authentic traction in doing so, there's a lot of excuses that come up of why they can't do better and why progress hasn't been made. However, Oriel, Joana, Chelsea, and Felipe they've taken it on themselves to create that change. They're not waiting around for anybody. Last year, Oriel created the One School. It's a free online school program really for Black creatives, and it's a way of attempting to address systemic barriers in the advertising industry. A lot of it related to who you know and networking and the sort of skill sets you need to get into the industry. Chelsea launched Coffee last year, which is this fake company to help highlight diverse talent on LinkedIn, since everyone's like, well, I couldn't find anybody. There's plenty of people. Just put coffee in your profile. In Brazil, Felipe started Escola Rua, which is the first free creative school in Brazil focused on diversity and inclusion for low-income students, and more recently began a Black-owned and operated agency, GANA, which is super exciting. I would say whatever we're going through in the US, in Brazil, it's exacerbated. We talked a little bit about it last year, but it's just a good thing to highlight. And then certainly last but not least, Joana is the first Black creative director to be hired by a big Brazilian agency in decades, not years, decades. And this is a year after she launched this first image bank made specifically for Black women. So everyone is super impressive. And as you can see, they've all tackled ways of or tackled the different barriers that people have put up as why we can't have diversity and inclusion. It's sort of like an answer to every, we can check that each one off. So it should be said, this is a group of people whose identities intersect, ethnicity, race, gender, socioeconomic status, and abilities, amongst other things. But this conversation really is going to be rooted in their personal experiences. So it's not going to cover necessarily the entire spectrum of what constitutes diversity. Just want to lay that out there. And then last but not least, we're also going to be broadcasting live to Brazil in Portuguese, thanks to our friends at Flag. So thank you guys. It's really awesome to be able to get both markets watching this and being a part of it, learning from each other. It's a time to listen and hold space. So that's what we're going to do. So let's jump in, because this is not about me and I've spoken enough. But listen, you guys are all here. you've come up with all these ways to overcome the self-imposed barriers that agency leaders say prevent them from achieving diversity and creating an inclusive environment. So we want to talk about, like, what are some of the barriers that your projects have overcome? We can start, Oriel, Felipe, Chelsea. Some barriers have been, elitism, networking, and just honestly uncreative and lazy recruiting. And for you, Joana, it's been a lack of representation of Black women in Brazilian advertising. So I think we should go around, talk a little bit about your projects, what you've done, and the response to each of the projects from just like the industry in general. So maybe let's start with Joana.
Okay, then. Thank you so much for having me here. Well, so as you said, one of the first barriers that I had was the lack of representation. We couldn't find Black women having an image bank. We couldn't find Black women being portrayed, and I mean Black women, Brazilian Black women, and we also couldn't find here in Brazil people that would hire us, as producers and makeup artists and, the executive part of it. The other barrier that my project still finds, it's funding. So there's, I guess if it would be like a project that it was made and ruled by a white man, maybe it was easier. But since I'm a Black woman, it's really, really hard to find funding. So those are the barriers that I have so far, and people getting to know the image bank as well.
Oriel, what about you?
Sure, yeah. So the idea of One School was something actually that I was trying to get off the ground about 4 years ago at an agency that we were all at probably around the same time. And it had a lot of enthusiasm, but I think it's the usual suspects of barriers, right? It was like, okay, you can do that, but this work comes first. Like the high paying clients get priority over these initiatives that were kind of seen as extracurricular. Like, it's like, yeah, you can do that if you want to put extra time and work your evenings. It wasn't something that we could build for, so it was kind of not a priority. And then it's funny, in the last 12 months when I guess, everything has changed and we started up the school, it literally started in a week, and we had calls from every agency and brands wanting to help. And it's just kind of, it's amazing, but it's also like a real indication of like, the industry is so good at removing barriers when we want to, right? When we see that there is something on the other side that we want and we see the benefit, those barriers just magically disappear, right? And I think that has been a bit of a lesson, that the urgency around the school and the kind of support is fantastic. But, my idea and other people have probably tried as well similar things before, and I think it just kind of shows that there are a lot of excuses, right? And it takes, it's sad that it's taken the last 12 months for it to become a priority. So now I think we're in a good place in that the environment and society and culture and everything has shifted so that the idea of the school is something that everyone wants to get behind and support. So the barriers I'm finding mostly are just kind of time, right? And finding the time to do it all and make sure that every student has like a great experience. Yeah, it's been a journey that's years in the making, I guess.
Thank you. What about you, Chelsea?
Yeah. So as Lani mentioned before, Coffee is essentially a fake company that helps people of color increase their visibility on LinkedIn. So that way hiring managers, recruiters, or even potential mentor-mentee matches can find each other more easily. Because, as we all know, LinkedIn is based upon connections, and that actually reinforces existing systemic bias. In terms of some of the issues that I found, I think part of it was like early on, just finding people who could actually help me make this thing. Like, I'm a writer, that's my background. I can think of solutions, but I can't always build them by myself. So having partners to actually come in and help on the conceptual side and help on like actually making the content to spread the message was a big deal. And so I finally had that in one of my partners, Stephanie Mitchell, to make that a thing. But now I have all these thoughts for what I think coffee could be and to make it bigger. But the issue is kind of finding those right partners, people who are interested for not only the right reasons, but actually have the stamina to make it bigger. You know, it's really easy, as kind of like Oriel is saying, to have the interest and to pull up with the funding or the effort whenever, you know, the house is burning and there's the emergency. But where's the rebuild? Where's the longevity? Where's the sustained effort? And that's kind of something that I'm looking for right now, is the people or the organizations who are prepared to do that.
Absolutely. Felipe?
In case of Escola Rua, it's a creative school focused on diversity and inclusion, okay? And I feel that agencies understood the importance of supporting the program, but the same agents still hire the same standard people, okay? And in other words, we prepare young Black and poor talents, but Asians support, but don't change hiring models, okay? It's complex.
Yeah, I think everyone here touched on a common theme, is that vocal commitment is different from doing the work internally. It's easy to pledge something, to say, we support this change, without saying, hey, but that means I have to change, or we have to change, or this sort of institution needs to change. Looking at everything that's sort of happened and having basically about a year for each of you with these projects, do you think that like the essence of your projects are understood and interpreted and people are using them as expected? And what have been some missteps or some things you've encountered along the way after you've launched? Chelsea, let's start with you. I know we've talked about this. I'd love to hear.
Absolutely. So as I said, I made coffee for all people of color. So that means whether you are Black, Latinx, Indigenous, Asian, no matter what, as long as you identify and are a person of color, coffee is for you. One of the things that I've had a lot of, though, is people from other underrepresented or marginalized groups wanting to join in and say like, oh, well, I'm not Black, but I've experienced, you know, XYZ, I come from a disadvantaged background, or I have a disability. I'm like, absolutely, I hear you. But there was a very deliberate intention behind what coffee is meant to do. And so oftentimes, you know, just like people who aren't of color for whatever reason, they want that same visibility, but coffee is just not that platform. The other thing that I found to be very interesting is, especially among like Hispanic and Latinx people, they often are asking if they count as a person of color or if they can use coffee as well. And that was something that I never expected to be a thing. And so I don't know if it's a matter of like people of color often being used interchangeably with Black is the issue, or if it needs to be a more nuanced conversation as to what it means to be a person of color. But that's often a question that I get. Someone's like, oh, like I'm Ecuadorian, can't I do this, this, and this? And I'm like, yeah, like that's you. Like it's for helping you. It's for elevating your experience. So it's really a lot of that has been not even necessarily an issue, but just like a reoccurring theme is, I guess, maybe the ambiguity around person of color or the fact that there aren't enough solutions for people from other underrepresented groups.
Yeah, that's super important. I think we were going to talk about it a little more later too, just with this, now that critical race theory and questions of identification are really coming into the common lexicon. On one hand, it's great, but it's also, you know, it requires intentionality and thinking about who am I really, how do I feel, what are my experiences? So it's all sort of intersecting at the same time. It's super interesting, and yeah, just working through it, I guess. What about you, Joana? What has been, you know, the response so far, and any mishaps or anything that you feel like isn't being understood or coming through?
The response has been great. You know, people see the project and they're like, wow, I love this project. It's something that I really wanted to do. or I have never seen like women in Brazil being portrayed like this before. So it's really good for us, you know, and especially because every spot that the image bank needed, it was filled by a Black woman. So nowadays, if someone asks me, do you know someone that could build a website and it is a Black woman? I'm like, yeah, for sure. I know that woman because she have done this image bank. But on the other hand, the thing is, as I said, you know, the image bank that is called Young, Gifted, and Black, it's YGB.BLACK. It has no funding. And sometimes people come to me and they ask me, how can I help? You know, and I say, and sometimes that these people they're asking me, they own big companies, you know, they're like, how can I help? And when I say, well, you can consider us like a production company, you know, you can give us a briefing and we'll give you back something, you know, some product. So you can like, for example, the money that you would spend in a production company, you could give to us, you know. And they're like, oh, you know, people get like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, you know, they're thinking that maybe they could help in some other way that I didn't figure out so far, you know. So that was a huge issue. And the other issue is that white men tend to come to me and they say, I have pictures from Black women. Do you want to put in your image bank? It's like, no, this is not how it works, you know. All the pictures are taken by a Black woman as well, you know. So, you know, here in Brazil, we have all this conversation about reverse racism. And I have like, no, this is not reverse racism. So those are some of the issues that we have in the image bank right now.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a few themes, but one of them is just, you know, we got really focused on the word diversity for a long time, and then inclusion started making its way in, and now we're really talking about equity. And I think, you know, you're bringing up that theme of like what people are asking for when it comes to change is going to require different levels of being a bit uncomfortable, from changing how you think to shelling out the cash. So just a point to make. You also just talked about the reverse racism thing. So that brings us into our next topic of microaggressions. Listen, I know that, like, I lived in Brazil for a while. 56% of the Brazilian, like, Brazil's a very Black country. It's 56% of the Brazilian population is Black. But Joana, like, you know, only last year were someone in your position in a big agency in decades. So I can only imagine, for many reasons, you know, the market's really racist still. Microaggressions are really hard to talk about, and I'm sure everyone here has experienced them and encountered them. And again, I think a lot of the sort of quote unquote common microaggressions are coming into, people are starting to become aware of like, oh, I shouldn't say this, or this is a bit offensive, as they would say. But you know, we understand microaggressions, and I think it's just an important topic. A lot of people don't really understand how deep it can get and how subtle they are. So we're going to start me with Felipe. Like, look, you were born and raised in a favela. You got into the industry a bit later in life. For a long time, you were the only Black man in the creative department. Can you give maybe 1 or 2 examples of some very common microaggressions and some harder to recognize microaggressions that you've experienced as a creative?
Yeah, I think you can imagine how many microaggressions a Black person experience in Brazil or in an adjacent in Brazil. But I want to talk about a curious microaggression, and it's very curious for Brazil. Because only 3% of Brazilians speak English fluently. 3% of total population. And this is a privilege of the higher class. And very rich people in Brazil are white people. But in Brazilian agents, people use English all the time unnecessarily. In documents, meetings, conversations, presentations, emails that are local between Brazilians. This is a microaggressions that happens every day because Black people don't speak English, okay, don't have access to English course, okay, and these microaggressions that happens every day, all the time, and it reinforces the exclusion of Black people in this place. Okay, so Brazilian people speak English at Brazilian agents only when necessary. Because, I don't know, Joana understand me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk to it, Joana.
No, that's what he said. We have people there. They say entire sentences in English, and if you don't understand English, and the funny thing sometimes that this is really tricky. People say that they are looking for someone that speaks English. And then, well, most of Black people they won't go there. They won't apply to that job. And when you meet the person that was hired and you start to speak in English, then most of the time they don't speak really good English. So you know how tricky it is, because the white people, they have how can I say in English now? I forgot the word is slipped, but they have like this blind confidence, just because they're white, of course. And we, most of the times, we just don't go there if our English is not perfect. So this is happens a lot.
Yeah, I saw a job post there's a place I work with a lot in Brazil. It's a global place, and it was like, hey, we're looking for Brazil. You want, todas as pessoas indígenas, para todo mundo, but then you have to speak English. And it felt a bit contradictory and selective. So I've also witnessed that. I hear you.
Many presentation full English, and in many agencies, it's crazy.
Yeah,
because we speak Portuguese.
Yeah, and yeah, that's crazy. I think also shows the American market and the way like this market here tends to try to dominate and influence things too. And Brazil's such a creative market; they can dictate your own rules on how you want to communicate and speak and create. Chelsea, Oriel, like bringing the theme to the U.S. a bit, or do you think there have been any advancements in terms of microaggressions? What is the risk also of bringing up microaggressions?
Yeah, I think there is an awareness of microaggressions. Like there's a lot of conversation about, saying the right thing and not misstepping and all of that. But at least for me personally in my career, I have not seen that fundamental change in terms of the actual interactions with people. There is a lot of awareness, but not a lot of evolution from my perspective. And it's very risky to bring up microaggressions because they are often so subliminal, or they are something that you have to have the context to understand. So you'll often find yourself trying to explain or make a case for something, and it'll get brushed off, or you'll be marked as someone who's difficult to work with, and that difficulty is just you asking for baseline respect. So yeah, I don't think there's been meaningful change at a wide scale, but at least in some of the conversations that I've had with individuals, I've at least been able to bring a little bit of that sort of understanding. But yeah, they're everywhere. It's from as a creative, having to do more work to defend and rationalize my ideas if they are uniquely Black, that my white creative counterparts don't have to do. Like no one else has to rationalize selling a product to themselves the way that like Black folks in particular have to do when it comes to the work.
That's a really good point. Oriel, is this something you guys talk about?
Yeah, I think we're very aware that our role in the school is not just to give our students great portfolios and get them into agencies, but it is to prepare them for a career as a Black creative and what that means, and to everyone's point on the call, like your experience is quite different, right? You experience these microaggressions that to most of your company or colleagues, they don't even exist. And so we we do talk a lot about not just the work, but also how to deal with things like that, right? And like how to, like what kind of like armor you need to have to be able to kind of navigate a career where those things will happen. You know, I think we're just preparing them for an industry that isn't quite there yet. You know, as to Chelsea's point, like I think there's a lot of conversations around it, but there are always new microaggressions. I find it's like once we agree on like, oh, these were problematic and these were an issue, there are still others. It's the underlying issue is that they kind of find other ways to reappear, you know, and whether that's like with new language or new scenarios. So yeah, we talk a lot about it, and usually that's through you know, myself, and the lecturers and the more senior people that we have coming in to talk to the students, just talking about their experiences, right? Like I think Felipe's example, you know, is so spot on, because to a lot of people, they wouldn't realize that that's even a microaggression. But that's the kind of thing we want to pass on to our students and be like, look, watch out. When you hear this stuff, this is kind of like what it means. And here's how you might deal with it. And usually it's like, here's how I wish I would have dealt with it. Because, you know, to Chelsea's point, in the moment when you experience that stuff, you just don't want to be the difficult, like, creative of color, you know? And we let a lot slide in order to keep the peace. So I think what we're trying to do is prepare the students not to do that, and to kind of go into their careers feeling unapologetic about you know, who they are.
And just here, Brazil.
Go for it, please. Yeah.
Yeah, well, since we have like these races, like we have these Brazilian races, you know, because, you know, when it's almost people like, I don't think that this is racism because, you know, I have a black friend, or because someone that was black raised me. And one thing that I always do when I felt, or when someone come to me and say, well, I think that someone was racist toward me, I say, well, if you felt so it was, you know, it doesn't matter if it's like some microaggressive or it was like what you consider like racism. I believe that if you felt that someone was racist toward you, so they were, you know. So this is really hard here in Brazil, because sometimes I'm like, oh man, he's my friend, I'm not sure, you know. Well, he's part of the family, so I'm not sure. So we are always in doubt if that was a microaggression or if wasn't a microaggression, you know. So I was like, if I felt that it was, yes, it was. It doesn't matter if it's like small or big.
Yeah,
I think go for it. Go.
Yeah, I think a lot of why it's hard to talk about microaggression, or it's hard to talk about racism, is that we often think about racism as hate, right? Like racism is inherently someone trying to hurt or harm. And in reality, racism is actually about control and centralizing power. So whenever you make a dig at someone, or whenever you choose to, you know, exclude people by making English the priority in a country where 97% of folks don't speak English, you are limiting access. You are deciding who gets to be where and in what spaces. And so we need to really stop thinking of racism simply as, oh, it's saying that I hate someone, or it's doing something deliberately to harm them because of their race. It's bigger than that. It is, are you actively trying to centralize power or control? And once you start looking at racism differently and not as just simply hate, then you can see it a lot easier as it's manifesting and where it's manifesting. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely people who actively hate Black folks. That is true, and that is very real. But hate is the symptom of racism. It is not the cause.
That was super beautifully said. Like, I don't know how many non-people of color, non-Black people are watching this right now, but I would say, especially for non-Black people of color and like white people as well, like when someone says something and they let you know that it hurt them, it didn't feel right, just, you got to sit with it and accept it and change your, I mean, I'm guilty. Chelsea knows I've been guilty of it. And you got to move on from it and learn from it and accept it, and accept that, again, yeah, racism isn't this it's not just like KKK and like Nazis and stuff. It's very simple. It's systematic, and systematic means it's hard to spot. But the people who suffer from it with it are the ones who are going to spot it out for you. So being open and receptive. Anyway, that's my message for everyone who needs to hear that. But thank you guys. I know it's like not the easiest thing to talk about because it can feel a bit revealing, and even giving specific examples feel heavy. So I appreciate you guys sharing. And of course, tiring. I'm sure it's tiring. It sounds tiring as hell. I don't know if I can say that, but listen, this is tiring. Let's talk about sort of being tired. Mental health, white privilege, like shit's really hard. We talk about this theme, this panel. It's like, what does it really like authentically take for diversity efforts to not fail on the creative side? Do you think that agencies like even really get what inclusion means? And moreover, we're seeing a big push towards hiring, and at least in my experience, and in watching other people's experiences, a lot of it's about leadership and how leadership deals with inclusion. Like, are they being tasked and held accountable for their own biases? And I ask this because there's like a deep bench of committed creative leaderships from CD, CCD, CCOs. Do you feel like they are showing up and being like, shit, I might be wrong, or like call me out? I mean, I think that's probably hard for someone in a leadership position. Oriel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it really varies, leader to leader. And, I feel very fortunate that the people I work with are very committed and put themselves in kind of uncomfortable situations, right, and have really tough conversations. But I'm sure that there are a lot of, agency kind of leaders and senior people who are almost thinking like, okay, the solve for all this and essentially to make all this like go away and go back to normal is to hire more people of color, and that will make us diverse. And it's like, that's my kind of worry, is that, we look at something like the numbers when we get to a point where we can say, oh, our agency is this percentage diverse and job done. And it's like, okay, but what is the culture? Like, do those people actually have a say on the work and on the processes? Are you allowing them to kind of change what the agency is? Like Felipe said earlier, like, are you changing your hiring practice? Are you allowing your culture to be shifted by the people you're bringing in, or are you kind of expecting them to just do the work to make you diverse, and that's it? And that's kind of my worry, is that people are looking for quick fixes, right? Because this was a really uncomfortable 12 months for everyone, and people are, the finger has been pointed at a lot of different agencies and leaders. So the reaction is to want to solve that quickly so you can get back to business as normal. And that, I think, is only something we'll just see in time, right? And one of those measurements is like, okay, congratulations, you've hired a lot of diverse people over the last 12 months. How long do they stay? What work do they do? Have you put them on like accounts with good opportunities, and have you given them a path to more senior levels? All that kind of stuff, which, as much as we want to say the job is done and kind of get back to life in the before times, it's like that stuff takes years. And I think some people understand that, but not everyone, right?
That's awesome. What about you, Felipe? Like, you're basically a CEO and you founded your own agency. Do you think that, being able to do that has allowed you to become a more, or to create a like safe and inclusive environment?
I think we are trying. We have to do this every day, because even though GANA is a now Black staff agency, we need to build this safe environment every day, because we were shaped by this traditional market. We must remain vigilant in this battle against some behaviors that come from it. Okay, and we think we are trying. I think we are trying every day to create a truly safe and inclusive environment. It's a very long battle.
Thank you. I think maybe just to build on that, for anyone who wants to answer, what does, and maybe more specifically, a safe or inclusive environment mean to you? And I mean in practice, like, what are some of the signals, moments, behaviors that would trigger you to say, hey, you know what, this place is safe, or this person is safe, or I feel like I can be here for a while? Maybe Chelsea?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a couple of things. The first thing starts with the money, right? Whenever I am talking about compensation, things like that, if you come in with a lowball offer, I inherently know that you're not valuing me not only as creative, but as an individual, right? And I'm not going to be messy and name names, but like there's been an instance where, you know, I was offered one thing, and then eventually when I was like, ooh, I don't know, there are complications, suddenly they found a literal 28% more money. And 28% is a lot, right? It's one thing if it's like, oh, we did a lot of extra legwork and then we came off of 5% more because we want you here that badly. If you have the capacity to bring literal tens of thousands of dollars back to the table, that means that you didn't truly want me until you saw what you'd be missing out on, right? And so that baseline of respect that starts with economics is number one. Then it boils down to how do the support staff get treated whenever you meet the person who's working at the front desk. Disproportionately, they're of color, or they're more specifically often Black. If I see people interacting with that individual and it's not great, they don't look happy, I'm like, ooh, flag on all the plays. And then whenever you're actually there, what safety looks like is, do you feel the compulsion to change who you are, change your hair, change how you talk, right? Can I talk like this? Or do I need to bring my voice up an octave so people feel safe? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? And then it's how are the team staffed? Who has the power? Who dominates conversation? And whenever something does go wrong, like what does happen next? Because ultimately, as a Black person, I know that someone's going to say the wrong thing sometimes, or there's going to be an idea that's well-intentioned but poorly executed. What happens whenever I raise that flag? Is it, oh, you're being too sensitive, or oh, it's not that big of a deal, or oh, you're projecting? Or is it, hey, we all need to take a step back and look at it? And oftentimes it's the former when it should be the latter. And it also is just like the little things, like who actually takes the time to invite you to lunch or recognizes that you're new and says something. Like, I'm a 6'2" Black woman. When I walk into a space, I'm noticed regardless. And to have people not even try to introduce themselves and things like that, I'm like, I know you see me. I know you know I'm new. You can at least say hello. And that hasn't, to be clear, been everywhere, but it's like whenever those little things happen, the bigger things are just, often the straw that breaks the camel's back at that point.
The little things add up, for sure, and speak volumes, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Joana? How do you, so basically, what are some things you look for in an environment or the people you're working with to know that, hey, this is a safe place for me?
Well, we are a little back here in Brazil, we are not, I wish that it was just like people invited us to have lunch, sometimes they, for example, I am a creative director. Sometimes they just, when I'm telling a white man what they have to do, sometimes they don't even acknowledge that. And I'm their boss, So I guess we need a training for us to stay at places because we are being hired. Someone told me, I don't know, a couple of months ago that I cannot find a Black woman to hire anymore because you are all employed. But the thing is that we keep on moving because the place that we are, they are not safe for us, And I'm really vocal. I remember one of your questions, Lani, that you sent us, but I'm pretty vocal. When I'm uncomfortable, I will say that, and I'll say that again, and I'll say that again. And if I don't see a change, I think, well, maybe I'm the one that have to move, because nothing is happening here. So I guess in Brazil, we are lacking people that could look us at and see us as Black people that need to be how can I say that we need a different environment than white people. You know, we need to have someone to look for us. We need someone to see us as a talent, and we don't have as many opportunities as white people have. So it's really hard. So I find that most of the places, most of agencies and companies that hire Black people, they don't know what to do with us. You know, they just don't know, and they're really cruel to us. And there are places that are really hard to us. You know, when for example, if I tell you that I'm feeling uncomfortable, it's like, no, you're not feeling uncomfortable. Come on, no, that's not happening here. You know, so that happens a lot in Brazil. It's just you know, not acknowledging us and not looking to give us space for us to grow and for us to be. You know, it's really hard. It's still really hard.
Thank you for sharing that. Definitely feels like gaslighting is kind of the name of the game, and when it comes to a lot of these situations, which is unfortunate. Speaking of the word gaslighting, I think just to wrap up a little bit, you know, again, these sort of big words from like critical race theory and also just like Instagram therapy are really just leaking into the common lexicon, and agencies love to be like, June 2020 was the reckoning and like everything changed after that. And in some cases, like in some regards, yeah, there was big change, there was momentum, but like what has actually changed and what hasn't? And then what is, like, maybe that's the question for each one as we wrap up. What has changed, you think? What hasn't? And what is one action, something tangible, whether it's a statement, a policy, anything you'd like to see enacted over the next year? Oriel, let's start with you.
Okay. So I think what's changed is there's been a kind of tipping point in at least the Black professional community, right? The fact that we can be here having these conversations and talking about systemic racism in our workplaces, white supremacy, you know, and like people on LinkedIn, right? I think LinkedIn, like people are saying things that they would not have said for fear of like what it's going to do to my career. And I think that we are past that line now, so that's a positive change. I think what hasn't changed is probably, like I said a bit earlier, like the desire, I think, for agencies to see this problem as something to be solved quickly. And I question whether people believe that it will actually make the industry and their agencies and their businesses better to solve it, or whether it's more like we need to avoid being called out, or we need to avoid the conflict that comes with being seen as a hostile environment for people of color. Because those are different things, right? You're solving it out of fear of the consequences, or you're gonna tackle it and you're gonna really embrace diversity because you believe it's gonna be good for your business. And I agree with that shift to that. And then policy, one thing, this is, okay, maybe not, like, this is going to feel a little ironic. I've thought about it just over the last year, having conversations. And I think that people can get almost addicted to the conversation about like diversity and the work that we need to do and not do the work. And, you know, the talk is the work. And I think what's great, and I have so much respect for everyone else here, is because like you all have done it and put the time in. I would love to see like a 12-month like blackout on diversity seminars and talks and things like that. And in 12 months, we all come back and report what we did, right? Every agency comes back with a report card and says, here's what we did in the last 12 months. And we can all kind of, you know, just talk about the action. I know that's a little bit, saying that on a panel about diversity is probably pretty ironic, but yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, I think it's important to hear that. What about you, Felipe? What has changed since A lot of things happened last June. And I know in Brazil that momentum picked up as well. What has not changed, and what is something you'd like to see enacted or something to change?
In case of Brazil, I think that almost nothing has changed. I don't know, for me, the changes, hiring and promoting Black people, especially Black women. And big agencies have the power of mediate change, immediate change, and the changes hiring and promoting Black people. It's simple. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, what have changed for us is that white people finally realized that maybe racism exists. So it was like the good and the bad thing. Now they're like, wow, that also happens in Brazil. There are men being killed by the police, every 1 hour in Brazil, just like George Floyd. So I guess that was like what maybe have changed, but as Felipe said, we don't have many changes here. Pretty much nothing has changed.
Thank you for those fair and very honest answers. Needs to be heard. Chelsea.
Yeah, I think I'd have to piggyback off of what Oriel said a little bit, and I think he's right. I think a lot of people in power, white and otherwise, have gotten really comfortable with the idea of talking about racism and diversity and inclusion and equity and all of those big, grandiose power words, and I'm here for it. Like, that's great, but there is a preoccupation with the discussion and the unpacking, and I'm like, cool. We're all on the same page there right now. Like, we got that part. Like, the additional unpacking, that's your homework. Go do that. We don't need to necessarily be preoccupied with the conversation whenever there's a dire need for actual action. And for me, that looks like a couple of things. An immediate thing that any agency could do: pay audit. See how you are paying your Black employees, how you're paying your Black women in particular, and fix that. Like, immediately. You've got the salaries, you know what job offers you put out and didn't. Fix that. Like, that is something that's tangible, actionable, simple, and you don't need anyone else. You don't need any little friends to go do that. So that's number one. And then number two, whenever it comes to actually hiring for all of these DEI roles, everyone's out in these streets looking for these pedigrees of like, who's been doing it for 12, 15, 20, whatever years. And that's great. And I'm sure there are definitely experts who are doing that. But this is something where it's a labor of love, it's passion, it's purpose. And if you're looking for someone who's ticked all these traditional boxes, you're not catching the innovative thinker. You're not catching the person who has the stamina to actually do what needs to be done. And I think a lot of reasons why people look for years of experience in these roles versus years of action is because it's a lot easier to say, well, we've got someone best in class in this space, and they may not have actually brought the change that needs to be done. They just had the job. So thinking really critically about what you're looking for when you're looking for these change makers, I think that's incredibly important. And also just like, be okay with firing some people. We all know that there are toxic people at every level, and there seems to be an uncomfortableness with getting rid of the old guard, with getting rid of people. If they're not changing, if they're not making space the way they need to, if they're the ones who are causing the microaggressions or the act of racism, fire them like last week. And I don't know why that's hard. I really don't.
You said it. But yeah, these are all really fair. I feel like I want to make a list and sort of publish it and be like, this is what we can do, guys. It's not as hard as people are making it. That's all we got for today. Thank you guys so much for taking the time and being so considerate with all your answers and just, talking about the hard things. And you're all super impressive, and hopefully we do that blackout and then see where we're at a year from now. I'm sure you guys are going to do incredible things, and we're all here for you. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So you guys, I am floored by the conversation. Once again, Brazil for the win, for pulling through on all the points, as the young people say, all the feels. Everything that needed to be said was said. Chelsea, I mean, we should just tick your checklist and, you know, put it on a placard and just circulate it. It could be like the new DEI manifesto. This job is not the job for the weak. It is a job for, you know, making magic happen and people doing the work who are committed to it, making change, and not just doing what has traditionally been done. As a chief diversity inclusion officer at Fleischman Hillard, they have given me the license to be relentless. And I'm going to take your list and take it back to leadership and say, this is what I'm talking about. Our young people are saying this is what they need to see, this is what they need to feel, and this is the action that needs to be taken. Oriel, I love the statement about let's black it out. Like, no more conversations. And that fits right into my motto of like, don't talk about it, be about it, right? We got to do the work. And what if we did no more panels? We did no more conversations. We just actually did the work, educated our crew, our team, to make sure that they were in the right mindset. And so I'm definitely inspired, so much so that we have invited a critical race theorist to come and talk to us at 12 o'clock tomorrow Eastern Standard Time to talk about some of the things that you guys mentioned, what some C-suite leadership people can tap into. So come back in and join us tomorrow at 12 noon to hear the conversation on critical race theory and how it affects the business that we do as creatives, as, you know, writers and storytellers. And I think it's going to be a really fascinating conversation. So again, thank you guys so much for joining us. Chelsea, Oriel, Felipe, Joana, and Lani, you guys were amazing. I know you're coming back in 2022 for us, and maybe come to Martha's Vineyard if you can this summer in August. Again, you guys were amazing. Brazil, shout out, besos to you all. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow for day 2. We will start off with our Can Diversity Collective scholars and ambassadors who will gonna tell us where they are now after having experienced the Cannes Lions experience in the south of France in 2019. So again, thank you, crew. I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. Thanks for the inspiration, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.